Hollywood has a way of destroying marriages. Some don't survive the wedding night headlines. Some don't make it past the first hit movie. Fame changes people, and it changes relationships even faster. So when two teenagers fell in love in a high school English class in 1970, nobody would have bet on them lasting 50 years. Especially not when one of them was already famous. By the time he was 16, Ron Howard had spent most of his life on television. Millions of people already knew his face. He was Opie. America had watched him grow up. But the girl he liked in English class? She wasn't impressed. She didn't care that he was on TV. She wasn't interested in being someone's spotlight. And that, more than anything, might be exactly why this story is still being told 50 years later. No affairs, no public separations, no tabloid wars. In an industry where marriages collapse in months, Ron and Cheryl Howard quietly built something that lasted decades. But quiet doesn't mean simple. Behind that lasting marriage were 3 rejected proposals, an $800 wedding, a wife who once disguised herself in a burqa to research a novel near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and a running joke between them that's lasted for 50 years and counting. This is the story of how it actually happened. By 1970, Ron Howard wasn't just a kid actor, he was already a piece of American television history. He'd spent years playing Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show, one of the most beloved shows on TV. He was famous before he was old enough to drive. But fame is a strange thing to carry into a high school hallway. Most people who knew Ron back then say the same thing. He wanted to be normal. He wanted to sit in class, make friends, and not be treated like a television character. And then he met a girl who didn't treat him like one. Her name was Cheryl Howard, and she would go on to live a life every bit as fascinating as his, just far away from the cameras. While Ron spent the next 5 decades building one of the most respected directing careers in Hollywood, Cheryl was quietly becoming a pilot, a novelist, and, at one point, a woman traveling through tribal territory near a war zone for the sake of a book. She rarely gave interviews. She stayed out of the spotlight by choice, not by accident. So what happens when one half of a marriage is one of the most recognizable men in America, and the other deliberately chooses to stay invisible? How does that marriage survive Hollywood? How does it survive children, fame, money, scrutiny, and 50 years of change? To understand that, we have to go back to where it started. Not a movie set, not a red carpet, just an English class, in 1970, where a girl who called herself shy and boring was about to become the most important person in Ron Howard's life. In the fall of 1970, John Burroughs High School in Burbank looked like any other American high school. Lockers, homework, football games on Friday nights. Except one of the juniors walking those halls had already spent most of his childhood on national television. Ron Howard had been famous since he was a toddler. By 16, he'd played Opie Taylor for years on The Andy Griffith Show. Strangers recognized him everywhere he went. But inside English class, there was one person who didn't seem to care. Her name was Cheryl Howard. She loved poetry. She was sharp, funny, and, by her own description years later, shy and boring. Ron didn't see boring. He saw something he wanted. There was an instant connection on his end. He felt it almost right away. She didn't. Cheryl was more guarded, more careful. She wasn't going to fall for the famous kid just because he was famous. If anything, that probably made her more cautious, not less. But Ron didn't let it go. And on November 1st, 1970, he got his shot. No limousine, no premiere, no paparazzi. Just a 16-year-old kid picking up a girl in his 1970 Volkswagen Bug. They went to see a re-release of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Afterward, they grabbed pizza at a place called Barnone's in Toluca Lake. That was it. That was the whole date. And somehow, that was enough. Years later, Ron would sum up that night, and everything that came after it, in 5 words. I met her, and there was never anybody else. No exaggeration. No dramatic flourish, he just knew. For a kid who'd grown up inside a TV studio, surrounded by scripts and cameras and people paid to be charming, here was a girl who wasn't performing for him at all. She wasn't trying to impress him. If anything, he was the one trying to impress her. That dynamic, Ron reaching, Cheryl staying grounded, would end up defining the next 50 years. Most love stories love a clean fairy tale. This one didn't go that way. Ron proposed to Cheryl. She said no. He proposed again. She said no again. Not because she didn't love him. Because she wasn't done becoming herself yet. Cheryl wanted to finish her education. She wanted to grow up a little more before she signed on to a lifetime with anyone, let alone a lifetime married to someone already living inside the Hollywood machine. That takes a certain kind of nerve. Turning down the guy you love, twice, because you're not ready to lose yourself in someone else's life. The third proposal happened in the most unglamorous place imaginable, his parents' couch. No ring hidden in a champagne glass. No big speech, just two kids who'd been through enough together to know it was time. This time, she said yes. On June 7, 1975, Ron and Cheryl got married at Magnolia Park United Methodist Church in Burbank. The entire wedding, dress included, cost about $800. There was no formal sit-down dinner. Guests stood in the church courtyard, eating cake and drinking non-alcoholic punch. It was the kind of wedding two working-class kids from Burbank would throw, except some of the guests happened to be television royalty. Henry Winkler, Tom Bosley, the cast of Happy Days mixing in with high school friends like it was the most normal thing in the world. Ron has said he walked into that wedding with absolute certainty. He never doubted it for a second. Cheryl, he suspects, felt something closer to runaway bride anxiety. Not because she doubted him, but because she knew exactly what she was signing up for. A life with cameras, a life with scrutiny, a life that would never be entirely normal again. She married him anyway. Here's where most people get the story wrong. They assume Cheryl Howard spent the next 50 years as the director's wife, supportive, quiet, in the background. That's not even close to the truth. Cheryl grew up in a house that was, by her own description, basically a zoo. Her father, Charles Alley, was a chemical and aerospace engineer, an amateur astronomer, and a competitive aerobatic pilot. At one point, the oldest competitive aerobatic pilot in the world. Cheryl didn't just admire that life, she lived it. She soloed an airplane on her 16th birthday. She'd been shooting guns since she was 5 years old. The family home had monkeys, an anteater, skunks, actual exotic animals in actual rooms of the house. She went on to earn a bachelor's degree in psychology and an MFA in screenwriting. And then, in 1997, she did something almost nobody would expect from a Hollywood wife. She traveled to the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. She was researching her novel, In the Face of Gin. Through a connection made by Robert De Niro, she was introduced to a retired CIA operative. She traveled with him into tribal territory, guided, and at times smuggled through checkpoints by two former Pakistani military officers. She wore a burqa to blend in. This is a woman who, by the time most people would call her just a wife, had already lived more adventure than most action movies. While Cheryl was building her own remarkable life, Ron was building one of the most respected directing careers in film. And through nearly all of it, Cheryl was quietly there, on screen, for just a few seconds at a time. Ron is superstitious about it. Cheryl has a cameo in almost every film he's directed since they were teenagers. In Grand Theft Auto 1977, she played a reporter. In Night Shift, she's the girl kissing her boyfriend. In Apollo 13, she's a bystander in the crowd. In The Da Vinci Code, she's a person at a book signing. When Solo, a Star Wars story, cut her scene for time, Ron felt so guilty about breaking the streak that he had her green-screened back into the film. In Eden, in 2024, she played a male food server, full wig, full mustache, completely unrecognizable unless you knew to look for her. It's a small detail, but it says something bigger. After 50 years, Ron still wants her there, not because he needs her to act, because some part of him still believes the work isn't quite right without her in it somewhere, even if no one else notices. Ron and Cheryl raised 4 children, Bryce Dallas, twins Jocelyn and Paige, and Reed. For years, there was a quiet rumor floating around about how those kids got their middle names. Eventually, their daughter Bryce Dallas Howard confirmed it herself. The middle names mark the places where each child was conceived. Dallas, for the city. Carlisle, for the Carlisle Hotel in New York. Cross, for the street they lived on in London. Reed Cross. It's a strange little detail, but it's also a glimpse into something real. A couple who turned their life together, wherever it took them, hotel rooms and foreign cities included, into private jokes and family history. The kind of thing only two people who've been through everything together would think to laugh about, decades later, in front of their own adult children. People ask Ron Howard all the time how their marriage survived Hollywood. He doesn't pretend there's a secret formula. There's no technique, he said. There's no tactic, other than communication is really important. You have to learn to communicate and have difficult conversations in constructive ways. He's also been honest about how much of it comes down to something less controllable than effort. There's an element of luck, he said, because people either grow together or they don't, and I don't think you can force that. It's not a cinematic answer. It's not the kind of quote that makes a great movie poster. But maybe that's the point. Marriages that last aren't usually saved by one big gesture. They're saved by thousands of small, unremarkable conversations, the kind nobody films, the kind nobody puts in a highlight reel. Ron has put it more simply too. She sees me the way I wish the world did, and I see her as the miracle that changed my life, end quote. On June 7, 2025, Ron and Cheryl Howard celebrated 50 years of marriage. To mark the moment, they donated a bench to Johnny Carson Park in Burbank, the same park where, as teenagers, they used to go to be alone together. They nicknamed it the kissing chair. It's still there. Anyone can sit on it. Ron marked the anniversary with a message that, in a lot of ways, sums up everything that came before it. What an adventure downriver through calm, soothing waters, and some tricky rapids as well. Our key: love and respect each other enough to just keep paddling. No scandal, no headline-grabbing confession. Just two people 50 years later, still choosing each other. As of 2026, they're still together, still married, still by all accounts paddling. So how did they actually do it? How does a marriage survive 50 years inside an industry that chews up relationships and spits them out before the first anniversary? The honest answer is less dramatic than you might expect. There was no secret, no trick, no perfectly timed gesture that saved everything at the last second. There was a 16-year-old girl who refused to be impressed by fame. There was a boy who kept showing up anyway. There were 2 rejected proposals because she wasn't going to disappear into someone else's life before she'd built her own. There was an $800 wedding with church courtyard punch instead of champagne. There was a wife who flew planes, fired guns, and disguised herself in a burqa to research a novel near a war zone, because she was never just the director's wife. She was always her own person first. And there was a husband who 50 years later still finds a way to sneak her into almost every film he makes. Not because he has to, because some part of him still wants her there. Ron Howard has said it himself, there's no technique, no tactic, just communication, and the willingness to have hard conversations instead of avoiding them. And underneath that, something he's honest enough to admit he can't fully explain: luck. The kind of luck that lets 2 people keep growing in the same direction instead of apart. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that love conquers everything, not that fame doesn't change people. It does, and it changes relationships too. But that 2 people can choose, again and again, for 50 years, to keep choosing each other. Not through one grand romantic moment, but through thousands of small, unfilmed ones. A pizza after a movie. A couch where a proposal finally landed. A bench in a park where 2 teenagers used to hide from the world. Ron Howard once described their marriage as a river. Calm water, tricky rapids, and one simple decision, made over and over again: keep paddling. 50 years later, that's still exactly what they're doing. And maybe that's the closest thing to a real Hollywood ending. Not a fairy tale, but 2 people who simply refuse to let go.